Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I am hanging out with grief today, and it's really not my favorite flavor. I find that grief is still one of my shadow emotions, and I have to be really disciplined not to numb or avoid or do things that, while providing relief in the moment, create a situation where I accumulate what I call emotional debt, which means that if I don't discipline myself to gently and kindly hang with grief when it authentically shows up, then I create interest on sort of an energetic loan. I have things that remain in my energy body, and it undermines my emotional resilience. So my emotional reactivity goes up, and my ability to manage future losses or difficult moments is undermined. I imagine we've all had that experience where something happened that was upsetting, but objectively not that big a deal. So you dropped your piece of toast and it landed, peanut butter side down, and you had this flash of just abject rage or hopelessness or overwhelm. And there can be a couple of reasons for this. One of them is emotional debt. So if you don't process emotions as they arise, it can kind of add up. And this is really common. Our society isn't all that emotionally intelligent. We don't necessarily learn a lot of tools for being with our emotions. A lot of times children are punished either overtly or with indirect negative messages for lack of emotional regulation, which is part of, being a small child. And the upshot is we end up with a lot of situations where it would be made a lot worse if we provided an authentic emotional response. There are people in our lives who would shut us down. This is a conversation that's coming up as another reflection of part of why our levels and impact of racism is so high, and so many white people in the United States are really unaware of the effect. And the result is that some white people make it so emotionally punitive to express distress over the harm done with microaggressions or outright acts of racism that it's de-incentivizing people to bring it up to us, to give us an authentic reflection. We can also often see this in our relationships. You may have been that person. I am embarrassed to admit that in my 20s I was that person, and I did a lot of therapy to stop being that person because it ultimately damaged my relationships. But there are those people who, when you give them authentic information about how they're affecting you, no matter how kindly or gently or skillfully, their emotional reactivity is so high and their level of upset is so significant that it's not worth dealing with. And for me, there are a lot of times that I just quietly step away from someone rather than giving feedback. I do that all the time on Facebook. Sometimes I even push the block button if I'm in a group and someone's participating in a way that I don't much enjoy, because, we have a lot of unsolicited feedback happening, and it's seldom welcome. It tends to make people armor up, and often it's so expensive. There's a gift to giving skillful, careful, honoring, respectful feedback that kind of takes a lot of energy. So if I'm going to do that for somebody, I really want them to have come to me and asked for it and know that it'll land, that it'll have value for them. But I digress away from the conversation of the grief that I'm sitting with, which is sort of a microcosm of how my day has gone. So in terms of precipitating events, let me just kind of give you a little bit of where my life is at in this moment. So it's the end of June when I'm recording this. I don't know when the podcast will be released in 2021, and travel has opened back up again, and I get to go to Hawaii on the 1st of July and see my parents, who I haven't seen in nearly 2 years at this point, who I adore. and I get to see some beloved friends who move there, and I get some really sweet time on my own. So I have this three-part: connect with friends, connect just with the island and my own energy, and drop in a beautiful place with my parents. And Hawaii is somewhere that I've gone many, many times and have this deep love for. So this is what's on the horizon. What has informed a lot of my experiences over the last month is that I rent the place that I live, but I own a condo. And I chose, again, it's in a dense urban area. And as someone who's energetically sensitive, renting out the condo and living a place with more trees and more space became a more aligned and a better choice. But because I really didn't like renting the condo, I didn't put enough discernment into choosing the person. I just went with the first person who really wanted it, who checked the boxes, rather than really listening to my intuition or, getting 3 qualified candidates and then picking the best one. And there were many problems over time, but I chose not to deal with it because of the energy and the effort and her being upset and an overabundance of compassion. And who could have anticipated COVID? So now I have the lamentable situation that I participated in a situation that's gone downhill. Not only is she not paying the rent, she also changed the locks and moved a pet in, even though it's a no pet lease, and is not communicating with me. So I hired a lawyer. It'll get sorted out eventually. I really see where my part was. Not that I could have anticipated this outcome, but part of my disposition is to have a really, really high value on closure. And there is no closure because the San Diego County has passed an ordinance that says, unless it's a health and safety issue, no just cause evictions. So the violations of the lease would normally, even under most of the COVID regulations, have been a cause where I could have, had her leave. That's not available to me for a couple of months. And so I'm just in this situation. The great thing is I've really gotten better at doing my business. So I'm making enough money to be okay covering my own rent and what I still have to pay for the condo, the HOA fees, the property tax, the insurance. And so while there's, not my preferred financial state, I'm not in financial fear or stress. And if this had happened, 5 years ago, I would have been absolutely, making myself miserable with the story that I wouldn't be okay. Now, in fairness, I have parents who would have helped me out and that sort of thing. So it wasn't really that, my world would have come crashing down around my ears. But my emotional reaction and the relationship to earning money would have resulted in a lot more drama. So the upshot of this is that I am a little bit down on emotional resilience. I've had a lot of overthinking the situation. There have been times when I've been angry, times when I've been sad, times that I've been in acceptance. And there's just a lot of stress in trying to figure out how to move and who would I even hire as a lawyer and what are my options. And so a lot of mental overhead to this and a lot of emotional overhead. So the journey continues, and about a week ago, I got together with somebody who I've really enjoyed in the past. Sweet guy, brilliantly talented at his art, but he's just gotten into a place where he's done a lot of introspection. He's in a little bit of a manic, I'm going to take on the world, and he just wanted to tell me his story, and he's kind of that place where, somebody just found something that they have decided is really going to change everything about their life, and now they know everything. So in this case, he was sure that his law of attraction, knowledge would, be the answer to everything that he knew. And so I described to a friend the encounter as having law of attraction mansplained to me, which was not super enjoyable. And I don't think he had a very good time because I, wasn't responding in the way that he hoped. And, he went on to tell me how other things he had very little experience in, other people were doing it wrong. And I was bummed because we've had sweet time together, but in this current, he knows everything, he's sure of outcomes, he doesn't really want feedback, he's filled with his own energy and vision, he wants to be witnessed, he's not matching energy. This particular moment in his life, it's not a really rewarding time for me to spend time with him socially. So this connection that had been really sweet at other times, ended up not being a match. So I just, okay, yeah, a little bummed. It would have been nice to have some of the sweeter moments that we'd shared at other times, but that's just not what's available for what works for me and where he is in his personal cycle. So I was a little sad about that. And then there was this other person that I'd been seeing since last October. I decided to do some very careful and judicious dating and start with a Zoom call and just really make sure there was a good alignment, talk about our COVID safety protocols, but, open the door for doing a bit more dating, for seeing if there was someone to connect with. And I had the best results I've ever had with online dating. And so I put up an ad, and within a couple of weeks, I had 3 men that I was really excited to explore further with. And one of them just turned out to be too busy in the middle of too much life transition. So we got to clarity really politely and kindly and said, it's just not, I'm not getting the level of engagement. He admitted it was so, and we parted ways, but I took my ad down because 2 new connections was more than enough. One of them, ran its course. We dated for about 4 months, and it was lovely, but he just didn't have the time to be present, and he didn't, I don't think, want to give up the boyfriend title and try to do something more casual. I don't really know, because he was in kind of an overwhelmed place and he just never got around to talking to me, which, I was bummed about. It's hard when I can't get that closure. But so it goes. That's part of the equation. But this other fellow, we'd had a really sweet connection. And then we took a break because the COVID numbers got really, really, really high. And I felt like, this is more casual. It just isn't smart. San Diego's numbers are way, way, way up there. And by the time that they had come down and I was ready to resume, he was having some conversations with his partner about how they were doing poly. So we took another oh yeah, absolutely. Get right with your primary relationship and then we'll have our experiences. And that had passed, but he really wasn't making much time for me. So long periods of time were going by. So about a week or so ago, I initiated hey, let's get clear. My longing is to have someone in my life that I see once or twice a month, and there's this continuity of dating or seeing each other. It doesn't have to be, a really structured relationship, but I like the closeness and the continuity if I'm going to participate sexually with someone. The more open-ended, vague couple months go by, it just kind of breaks that. And at the risk of going way too TMI for a podcast, I've had the opportunity to really explore the Tantra communities and explore the polyamory communities and have a lot of really cool, rich, amazing one-off experiences. And so while I can hold my own container in terms of the emotions that arise around sex, I'm just not as interested in it. So I reached out to clarify, said this is what I'm hoping for, and if not, this really isn't something that I'm interested in sustaining. So he got back to me after a week. This was yesterday, and basically said, I'm really wanting something more casual. I'd love to see you. I really enjoy our time. I appreciate you, but I'm not interested in being under the category of dating you or seeing you once a month. It's more free-flowing than that for me. And so I wrote him back and said, okay, well, it seems like neither of our first choice is on the menu with the other one. And that's a bummer, but that's the reality of adult relating, He's in a position where he's already got a primary partner, so he's looking for meeting different needs, a little bit of variety perhaps, a little bit of fun and excitement and stimulus, whereas I'm looking for something with a little more depth and presence and continuity. And we're just mismatched. I think he's great. I'm not in love with him. I'm not thinking he's the most wonderful man ever. I'm not tempted to compromise for whatever little bit of time I could have because something would be better than nothing. I'm like, it would be good to not just let this go. And so today I'm low-level sad about this. And it's not debilitating or overwhelming. I'm still able to do things, but I'm noticing some of the hallmarks of grief. So I've been really consistent for several months now of working out either every day or every other day. And today was a day that I'd committed to myself to work out. And I found that the influence of grief makes me want to be in stillness. And so my longing was to give myself a free pass. So instead, after much internal conversation, I made a deal with myself that I'd do a gentle workout, just 10 minutes in. If it really wasn't working for me, I could stop. Like, I wasn't going to force myself kicking and screaming, but if I got into it and could be in the flow, that would be a good thing. It wasn't a day to push, but some movement, good for balancing chemistry. So I did that, and it worked out fine, and it was good. And I noticed that I had this incredible longing. So grief started last night, and I don't do a lot of desserts. I'll have some chocolate, but I tend to minimize that because my body does better if I stay moderate in sugar. And particularly with planning to get on a plane soon, I really want my immune system to be at its best. And I just had the idea, I think I should stop for ice cream. I could stop for ice cream. And I checked in with my body and felt like, no, it's probably not the best choice. And then today I woke up and, I was thinking, I'll go get a takeout pizza. Pizza sounds delicious. And again, it's not that I have like this no pizza shall cross my lips rule, but the pizza from the store versus the pizza I make at home and cover with a bunch of veggies is a little different in quality. And it was a movement to shift the emotional landscape. I wanted to hack my system by having something that, created a very particular emotional response, which was part of why, I kind of took myself by the ear for the exercise, because the, hey, let's get pizza for lunch conversation predated the, I think I really need to exercise. I think that would be a good choice. And sure enough, the exercise eased it up. And the nice thing about this is it isn't debilitating grief. I really don't think I have a lot of emotional debt around grief, so I'm not grieving a whole bunch of other things I never worked through. And overall, my life is in really good shape. My business is thriving. I get to do work that I love. As I approach the anniversary of my podcast, it's almost up to 10,000 unique downloads. My kitty cat is in great health. I have amazing friends. I live in a place that I love. I get the joy of having dogs without having dogs because my neighbor's dogs come to my sliding glass door and I get to play with them, but then close the door in their cute furry faces and go back to my life without having to be accountable for all the overhead of dog ownership. Like, there's so much that is right and good in my life. And a lot of times I think people tend to silver line things or try to go gratitude practice, which is good. I think as a general rule, cultivating gratitude and cultivating big picture is good. But, there are a couple of things that objectively suck. I don't like being in a place where I've needed to hire a lawyer to deal with a tenant who's, violating the lease and doesn't want to leave. That's stressful. I don't love it. And it's a kind of stress that my mind and system don't deal with as well as some other kinds of stress. And so there's just this feeling where I'm bummed that this guy who I enjoyed, wasn't in love with, wasn't deeply invested in, but just wanted to go a little deeper, wanted to share a little more than what he was available for or interested in or what was alive for him. And so I'm just being with that. And what I want to share about grief, while I kind of have my finger on the pulse of it, is how much we do ourselves a disservice if we avoid it, and how second nature it can be to reach for relief, whether in the form of food or distraction. I really have the trust that, it's not a scarcity problem with dating, it's a sorting problem. Now, I happen to live in San Diego County. We've got 3 million people. I see a lot more world travel on the horizon. There's an abundance of possibility. And as an introvert who, lives alone with her kitty cat and enjoys the days when I don't leave the property, I'm not necessarily meeting a lot of new potentials. So if I put up an ad, it was incredibly effective at generating opportunities to connect with new people. And I have it in my mind that when I come back from Hawaii, that'll be a great time, if I feel called, if I'm not committed to other things, to open that door again because I really would love to have some of that connection. And yet there's a part of me that wants to skip the sadness and the ending and immediately jump back into, okay, two different possibilities have fallen away in short order, get the ad up. But I couldn't really be present with anyone who was interested in connecting because I have a full schedule. Every single session before I leave is booked. I have other commitments. I need to figure out how to do this travel thing again. I haven't packed a suitcase in a while. And mostly the impulse to do it sooner rather than later is about wanting to skip the ending part. And one of the things that's been really painful for me that I've really had to work to deal with as part of the price of admission for doing the dating thing, for being in the dating game, for meeting new people, for exploring with them, is that when it doesn't work out, sometimes people handle the ending by ghosting. They just disconnect. And I don't mean that you've been in an online conversation and suddenly they stop talking to you. For me, it's specific to people that I've gone down the relationship path. We've shared intimacy. We've spent time together. And, there was someone who I dated for 4 months who was interested in being called my boyfriend. Those conversations were on the table. And he said he would talk to me. He said he was available, and then he never made time. And I just gave up after a while trying to get him. And then ironically, I followed up later. I'm like, well, it's been a couple of months, maybe something was misinterpreted. And I wrote him a letter just saying, hey, it would really ease my heart if we could have closure. I'm not expecting you to change your mind, but it just makes a difference. I'd rather smile when I think of you instead of remembering the ending. And if we could just have a kind goodbye conversation, that'll switch it for me. And ironically, he texted immediately about how, he would write the next day, and then weeks went by and I've not heard another peep out of him. So, I don't know what all was going on with that. And at the same time, there's a clarity that this experience that I really don't like is part of what people do. And as a woman, I could say men do it, but I think women do it as well. I think that it's hard to have those uncomfortable conversations. And for sure, if somebody is likely to be violent or unreasonable or has a really bad temper, backing away from them without a conversation is really reasonable. But for someone who's never shown any sign of that, the mature, healthy, responsible thing to do would be to presumably have a conversation that says, I think we need to step away from this. This isn't working. And so with the fellow who it just wasn't alive for him, I appreciate that he took the time to write the email, to respond, to have the conversation. Now, granted, he was hoping we'd go forward with his vision. So, that may have influenced the results, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and credit him with the emotional maturity to have those conversations. But when we don't do endings, there's a pain that sort of builds up. And when that bill comes due, I find that it's really expensive. It tends to undermine your health and your happiness and your trust in others and your self-trust. And it gets in the way of seeing the world clearly, because if you are instinctually backing away from pain rather than going like, all right, I get to hang with a little bit of grief for a couple of days. Again, this is not acute grief. I'm not sobbing in despair. I'm pretty happy in my life, but my heart's a little bummed and I feel it, and it's making me want to slow down and be a little more yin, and I don't like it. And in the background, I keep having ideas about, distracting myself in some way so that I don't feel this. But the trouble is sometimes people can become so adverse to a mild bit of emotional awkwardness that they don't get in the game of participating freely with other humans. They won't speak up for something that's important. They won't ask for what they need. They won't take risks of new relationships. Our biochemistry and our neurochemistry has this weird thing where social rejection lights up a lot of the same parts of the brain as physical pain. And it creates this aversion to social rejection at a real biological level, because back in the day in hunter-gatherer tribes, being connected to other people was incredibly incredibly vital to survival. You were unlikely to be able to survive back in the day if you didn't belong in the tribe, if you couldn't make it work with the tribe. So we have a lot of things that happen, and they're finding that loneliness can be as high a risk for mortality as things like smoking in older adults, and that's some pretty potent research. So the thing about not making peace with grief is that you're letting your instincts take over, and they will box you in more and more with limiting your choices. And so it gets in the way of seeing the world clearly, and the mind can rationalize instinctual fears to the point that you get afraid of going out of the house or afraid of connecting with someone, and your mind can always make up terrible stories to justify playing it safe. And so the invitation I want to make, acknowledging, there's all this crazy stuff that happens. Like I mentioned, the reason I told you about the trip to Hawaii is that I really feel, there's a part of me that really feels like this sucky, heart-heavy experience of sadness is going to be what I feel forever. That I will be feeling this forever and ever and ever, and it will not ever go away. And that's a ridiculous premise. I've been sad lots of times. I've lost animals, I've lost loved ones, I've lost jobs, I've lost homes, I've cried my eyes out for, events that happened. I've had relationships end, and I have lots and lots and lots of data points where I felt this way, or far, far, far more intensely. And then the cycle moved and the emotions flowed through like weather, and then it was something different. And I know intellectually that, I'm going to be on a plane in Hawaii getting to see land that I love and people that I love. And so there's connection and adventure and wonderful energy on the horizon, but that doesn't feel true today. And I just want to offer this because I know I work with people where it isn't just, a little bit of grief hitting you harder because it's on top of a time that's maybe undermined some of your emotional resilience. Like my emotional resilience isn't at 100%. The condo situation and my reaction to it have made me more reactive to other things. So I think I always would have felt grief. I think the grief is amplified a little bit because of the context of that. But at the same time, it's limited in duration. But I work with people who've been in, really, really major depression and for long periods of time. And their brain will lie to them and tell them it's always going to be this way. It's hopeless. Nothing will ever be different. And that gets in the way of being in growth mindset that says, well, I haven't figured out how to hang with myself in a good way while I'm depressed and keep up the research and development of trying a bunch of different things to shift the dial on this in a gentle, kind way. Because so many people wrestle with depression, we actually have a huge body of knowledge. There's so many people who have been acutely, miserably depressed and then got to a place where they weren't, where life was actually really good at the level of circumstance. And a lot of them have written it down and made videos on YouTube and written books and written blog articles and shared it with friends and concretized it into programs. There's so much collective wisdom that you can access with an internet connection. But that feeling of it's going to be like this forever kind of gets in the way of us being able to honor this particular moment. We're trying to escape a pit of feeling. And again, there's just a lot that goes into this. So I'm leaning into the hard-won maturity that says, Katie, honey, no good is going to come of numbing. You don't actually have anything that urgent on your plate. You could be with this. You could sit with it. You could just feel where it feels in your body. I know you don't like the flavor, but truly nothing bad is happening. This isn't intolerable. And then there are just these moments where my mind scrabbles a little bit like a caged animal trying to find relief. Do I reach out to someone? Do I overrepresent the amount of distress I'm in so, someone will come and console me? Do I give myself permission to eat something that put a little bit more of a load on my body, but, relieve the emotions? Like there are all these strategies, and my mind is running in the background looking for those. And I just want to acknowledge this because the discipline of breathing into grief and saying, grief, we're going to hang out. Thich Nhat Hanh had a book called Anger that I think is also really applicable to grief, where he's like, if you're angry, don't act it out, but just be with anger, be present with anger, hang with anger. And I don't tend to run anger for long periods of time. I'm usually pretty able to drop beneath it, although I admit that at moments of feeling the grief, I was trying on the end run of imagining a scenario where someone made me really angry and going into my indignation about it. So of all things, I'm in a community for this exercise program that I love, and 99% of everything that's shared is inspiring and amazing, and I'm cheering people on. And some people are just not very emotionally intelligent in the way that I define it. And I found myself like, grr, this person is trolling and then gaslighting, saying really obnoxious things and then going, oh, you're all so sensitive. And I was like all on a tear about him, which I just hit the block button because I didn't want to deal with his participation. And everybody else could choose. They could choose to scroll, they could choose to not, but my mind was like arguing with him and composing devastating repartee to tell him how bad and wrong he was, which I wasn't going to do because why get in an argument with that person? But it was a way of like hacking my own chemistry of going from, I don't like this whole grief thing, so let me up-level it a little bit. Let me move myself into something that has a little more ease and relief and pleasure in it. So let me give this a try. And it's kind of a trick. Sometimes I use that to wake up in the morning. I'll find myself, imagining a slight and my way of navigating it with indignation and determinedness as a way to hack my own chemistry to get myself awake before coffee kicked in, or if coffee isn't kicking in as much as I wish it would. So it's sneaky, all these ways that our mind is like, oh yeah, let me shift the chemistry. I could go into a story of how bad and wrong he was. I could go into a story of how bad and wrong someone else was. I could eat something with sugar. I could eat something with a lot of fat and salt. I could, distract myself with various things. And these strategies, my mind is flashing them up so quickly in response to, this doesn't feel good. I don't like this. And it's just taking that discipline and that maturity and a lot of research and development of numbing and avoiding grief, because it's one of my bigger shadow emotions, to say, yeah, we're just going to sit with some sadness. It's sad that this person didn't choose to experience with you what you invited him to experience. And that's valid. And he gets to do that. And when I am ready, I'll get back in the game and I'll go back to exploring who would like to choose what I would love to share. And that will be its own rich and beautiful piece of the journey. But I'm deliberately not putting up a dating ad today because that's one of these distraction strategies when I don't really have time. Like if the universe drops someone, it would be hard to receive them now because of everything else I have that I'm deeply committed to between now and the time that I come back from Hawaii. So I just want to offer this. I think that many people offer tools and techniques, some of which are more valid than others, for shifting out of a really stuck emotional place. But I think that people don't try, let me try hanging with this a little bit. Let me try breathing through it and seeing what wants to be heard and what wants to be felt, even for a few hours. That it can be like moments of feeling something, and then we're scrambling for avoidance and distraction and numbing techniques. So I just want to offer this while it's up for me. It's not up in a horribly acute way. I'm still online doing other things because it's not loud. This isn't debilitating. This isn't a huge loss in my life, but it is a moment that will go better for me in terms of getting to bring all of myself forward if I don't leave a part behind that didn't get to complete the cycle on this. And so, we don't want to get stuck in the cycle, but neither do we want to never go to the depths. Like a lot of people, they won't drop all the way down and thus get to the point where things will naturally rise back up. And again, this is more for the sort of average person. If you're somebody who's dealing with clinical depression or other kinds of imbalances, there's a lot more complexity that I don't fully understand because that's not what I deal with. I deal with sort of the normal standard issue American dubiousness of feelings and avoiding them through overachieving and perfectionism, and finding that strategy was quite exhausting, and then getting some help and support to do things differently. And I just want to acknowledge that even with so many years and having learned so much and so much clarity that no good comes of numbing emotions, there's still this part of my brain that is strategizing massively, that I really need to provide with some adult supervision today, so that I make the priority to allow this emotional cycle to complete. And again, in the middle of it, it just doesn't feel viable that an emotional cycle would complete. We don't have that perspective. It really feels like it's going to be that way forever. Even though it's never been that way forever for most of us, there's still this deep conviction on some level. So I just kind of want to call that out. Hopefully, as you're listening to this, you're not in a big grief cycle, so you can file it away. But if you are, I hope that it kind of offers a map for opportunities to be with it. And if you are in that place where you've avoided grief and now you're in grief, there can be a lot of emotional debt. So be gentle with yourself if a lot of stuff you haven't dealt with shows up all the way. I just haven't had the skill to completely restore myself back to center with the condo situation I'm dealing with. I've gotten better, I've worked with it, I've used a lot of tools, I've exercised, I've gone for walks, I've connected with friends, I've found people to hold space for me. I've done all the things that I know to do. I've spent time in the hot tub, I've done breath work, I've done fire ceremony, and it's helped. It's moved me up a lot, but it didn't completely get me back to baseline. And so I'm just in a place of saying, all right, how do I have an okay meantime while I'm not at 100%? Like, how can I just hang on this part of the journey, even though it isn't my favorite? And I really want to just offer, I imagine different people will take different things away from this, but I just want to offer a little bit more of a glimpse into this moment in my journey where there's some great things going on and some challenging things going on. And this is sort of what's moving through for me. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.